Welcome to a new edition of SCDM Live. In today's webinar, we want to explore the future direction of the clinical data management industry and the role SCDM will play in guiding that. It's a chance to hear the insights and vision of the Society's new chair for 2021, Sanjay Bhardwaj, in the annual State of the Industry address. Sanjay is the Executive Director Data Sciences at AbbVie. He's hugely experienced in end-to-end clinical data management, from strategy formulation to hands-on project management and execution. And we're excited to have one of our largest audiences ever today, with attendees joining from all over the world. You are all very welcome. We want to hear your thoughts too, so as Sanjay talks, please use the pane to the right of the screen for comments and questions. And with us to answer those questions, we'll have the past, present and future SCDM chairs. So let's begin. First, a short video before Sanjay takes over. Enjoy the webinar and don't forget to keep those questions coming in.
Thank you, Kathy, for such a nice introduction. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. I hope everyone is well and staying healthy. I'm truly honored and humbled by the opportunity to lead SCDM in 2021. I have said this before at previous talks, but I'll say this again. This organization, the Society for Clinical Data Management, is run by its volunteers. It rests on the shoulders of hundreds of its volunteers. And I would include our board members, our committee chairs, our task force members, who continue to give so much to this organization year after year. And I know why you do that. Your passion for CDM is very evident. So before we begin this conversation today about what's new and what's changing for data management and where the Society for Clinical Data Management is headed, I wanted to thank each and every one of you. It is truly my honor to be part of this organization and really a privilege to be leading it in 2021. I also say humbled because the seat of the chair of the board of SCDM was once occupied by friends whom I immensely admire and who over the years have become my mentors. So I'm very excited to be here today and talk about both the state of our profession and my vision and plans for SCDM as a year in 2021. You know, as we were putting together this kind of conversation and this talk, which is our annual tradition, it dawned on me, you know, data management has been a profession that I believe very few of us, if any, I think really planned to be in when we graduated. I can tell you that was indeed the case with me. The day I walked into working for Ranbaxy Labs in India in the mid-90s, I personally did not see what the big deal was about clinical data in relation to, in the context of every other data that I had prior to that point in time had worked on, be it the financial data, automobile industry data, and so on and so forth. But I will tell you, you know, over the years, I've come to see what is the big deal and what is the big picture. So if there are any students who are attending today's talk, who may be studying life sciences today or informatics in college, and who want to dream into getting a profession to help others, or anybody who is new into our world of clinical data management, I say this: there are very few jobs that provide somewhat of a deeper meaning to the work people do. And I would say, you know, being almost 25 some odd years in the industry, and I seem like I'm aging too. I would say without a doubt, our work in support of clinical research is one such profession. Yes, it may appear to us sometime that we are a small cog in this big wheel as far as the R&D goes, but it became very clear to me very early that what we do matters. What we do matters because the work that we do as part of clinical data management practitioners helps bring something extraordinary, in the form of a hope, in the form of a treatment for people who may be suffering from all sorts of conditions and who may have nowhere to turn. So much so, I would think, and I'm sure you all have pondered on this one way or the other, being in our clinical data management process. If I could save, I would think, sometime that if I could save these just few extra days, these 3 extra days in our database log for a pivotal study, could I get, or could we get, as part of my team, could we get this drug out in patients' hand 3 days early? So to you all that are starting new and in clinical data science and currently do not feel this passionate about what we do, I can assure you, one day you will too. So I want to welcome you to the world of clinical data science, clinical data management. So as we've said earlier, this is the second of our webinar in this leadership series. In the first one, you got to interact with some of our leaders who have been working within the clinical data management discipline, partnering with SCDM. You also heard from our current past chair, Mikkel, at that meeting, where we talked about several of these game changers that are all around us, whether the concept of AI, the machine learning, and its adoption and its use cases within our discipline, supervised, unsupervised AI, and then we talked about risk-based quality management and so on. But today's talk isn't going to be rehashing those game changers, but it's going to be in light of those game changers, those trends. And there are some other trends that I think we need to at least acknowledge them. What is there for CDM in 2021 and beyond in the near and medium term? And what's next for SCDM as a society? So can we get into the agenda? Next slide, please. So the agenda today is pretty simple. I hope to be done and hope to be able to give you some time if possible. I know getting hour and a half from a busy schedule is hard these days. But given the broad nature of this conversation about, speaking and discussing the entire industry of clinical data management in the bigger context, we're going to be using more traditional slideshow presentation format, where I'll start by briefly looking back into 2020. We'll then dive into essentially the main crux of this conversation, which is what's next for CDM and SCDM in the near and medium term. And then we will take any questions you may have. And hopefully to start a new tradition as part of this annual address that SCDM chair does, I've also invited Mikkel and Mayank as the current past chair and the current vice chair. And hearing from Mayank this morning that he's unable to make it due to a little bit of sickness. Mikkel is going to be there with me towards the end of this conversation, and we'll get into a panel conversation to answer any and all questions you may have. So this will allow you the opportunity to interact with both of us, and hopefully in the future year, the three of the individuals, the current past chair, the current chair, and the current vice chair. So let's dive into the agenda and let's look at 2020. What a year we have had, with the backdrop of COVID-19. This obviously was a year like no other I have seen in my life, and I'm sure applies to almost all of you. Looking at this picture, from masks to protective gears to empty streets, sports being played without fans in empty stadiums. COVID really blanketed our lives, both outside but also inside our homes. Kids adjusting to remote learnings, working from home for parents, and both parties trying to consume the same internet bandwidth at home. I don't know about you, but I have really felt um, the number of issues that one would have when there are so many parties at the same time trying to get on a Zoom call. Um, so basically, no aspect of our society was immune to such a large-scale disruption to our lives. And our work in clinical trials and clinical data, and the data we collect, the data we manage, was also not immune to this pandemic, right? And as far as CDM goes, this was, again, our first ever holding our flagship event virtually. But having said that, there is an optimist in me. With all of COVID-19 had to throw at us, with the current vaccine productions, with the distributions that is taking place and getting these shots into people's arms, I want to hope that the worst is behind us. Yes, there are different strains looming around, but hopefully these vaccines will be effective along all of them. And I do believe there is a sliver of hope for us to return to some semblance of normalcy. Of course, we won't be going back into the old world, but I think, and people say it's a new normal, but I think the world would be slightly different. And again, while 2020 was a year ridden with such a human tragedy, there is no easy way to put it. But it also, on a little bit of a different spin to this, it also accelerated discovering treatments and these vaccines in a speed that was sort of unheard of. So to me, as I look back into 2020 and what our industry collectively, from a global R&D engine, has been able to do, able to step up to the challenge and deliver at the end of the day, I think also was pretty unprecedented. So that to me was 2020, right? So let's look at some of the CDM specific lessons and SCDM specific lessons in this year. So CDM during COVID-19. So when COVID hit, the conduct of our clinical trials, we were all thrust into this hypercare, as one would say, into both estimating what this meant for our trials, estimating the impact, that, hey, could we continue to get this timely and quality data that we have so used to seeing and reviewing, at a time when patients weren't able to visit their sites themselves were closing down, bringing in and adopting set of plans to ensure, all kinds of protocol deviations that were caused by COVID-19 pandemic were somehow being documented and captured in our clinical database in such a way so that we could summarize the data at the end of the day. CDM, seeing from where I was able to see my particular organization, was definitely in the front and center of all of this action that was taking place. Reading quickly and aligning with what the regulatory guidances were coming in, as well as sitting down with our cross-functional partners, building a kind of response, including adopting different ways of conducting our clinical trial, different ways of bringing the data in, whether it was telehealth, adoption of telehealth that we did in some of our studies, capturing local lab data, not being able to ship the lab samples back to the central labs. How do we continue to capture labs, shipping IPs to patients' home, and again, so on and so forth in terms of the kinds of issues that we all had to deal with, CDM being in the front and center of this action. And even now, we're sitting in the early 2021, and it seemed like, gosh, that was so long ago. Even now, though, while we have these vaccines, there is a need to understand. I'm sure all of you are seeing this within your respective organization. Are these events that are taking place in our studies, are those events due to vaccinations, right? So similar to summarizing COVID-19 protocol deviations, summarizing events that are taking place due to vaccinations is definitely a need. So the changes in our databases continue, right? And while COVID-19, forced many of us to work from home, it also disrupted some of our global data management operations. Some of these countries went into very sudden lockdowns. So there was that on top of everything else that we were all dealing with. I would want to say though, while CDM wasn't front and center because ultimately it was the data that we needed to continue to capture, but the entire clinical development sort of machinery was on this, right? So in terms of learnings for data management, I was, as I was kind of putting the slide, I said, what, there would be, I'm sure, dozens and dozens of articles and books that are going to be written about, let's draw out what learnings would we have from COVID-19. But as far as clinical data goes, from my perspective, it is difficult to proactively estimate the risk and the impact of something as far-reaching as COVID-19. I would say, though, and I've said it just now, that it ultimately boils down to data and data flow. Avoiding disruptions, continuing to collect data, continuing to ensure our patients are safe, ensuring watching their safety. All of that is done through our processes today because we are capturing this clinical data and we are bringing that data into our shops and allowing people to have a look at it. The data that is of highest quality and integrity, right? So to me, that's the key. So in terms of what the learning here is, we need to always make sure that we are always looking at our data and we are always looking at our data flow and any disruptions along those lines, that those are estimated as far as possible. But I said, it was pretty difficult to measure and estimate something as far-reaching as COVID-19. On the SCDM side, quickly assembling, putting COVID-19 specific free webinars that we were able to do, sharing in the learnings that we were all going through this challenge in our respective organization was pretty nice sort of an action that SCDM took. And personally for me, working alongside Mikhail and the EC and the board, running and steering a sort of a nonprofit in this type of time was an awesome learning experience for me personally. On the annual conference, we ran through going through multiple iterations, multiple options, simulations. Hey, what if we did this? Could we have a hybrid event? Could we still have a very small in-person event? But I'm glad that we chose to go through those simulations well in advance and put together, I think, a virtual show that we decided early on, which I would say I think was touted as one of the most successful conferences in our industry at that time, being able to draw out as many of our practitioners, our partners. But having said that, while we put together a virtual conference, attending a conference while being away from one's office is one thing. Doing it while people are at home, kids, screaming in the background and your emails popping up on the same laptop is just very different. That was the reason I would say, in as we were discussing, how do we keep this content that we are going to put out? How do we ensure this content is going to be available for people to go back to? And hence, we decided to make that content available until end of last year, so that people could tune in afterwards. 2020 did have did make a dent in our financials, requiring us to draw upon our savings, our reserves, which I think is okay. That's why reserves are kept. If there is an unprecedented year, I think all of us would say 2020 with COVID-19 was an unprecedented year. So that's why the reserves are kept, so deal with a bad year like that. We also invested and launched 2 additional white papers our innovation committee, Patrick, and the committee members there, all different walks of clinical data management, I think deserve the entire credit for such a successful series of thought-provoking, forward-looking kind of content that SCDM had the privilege to provide a platform for. And if some of you have not had the chance to take a look at it, I would say go to scdm.org and you would see a section specifically for clinical data science. And you will find all of our clinical data science specific content in there, which is, by the way, something also we put together in 2020. So a lot to be proud of in terms of from an SCDM perspective. We also launched, or I guess concluded our prep for our journal of Clinical Society for Clinical Data Management, an open access peer-reviewed journal, which will have its first issue out pretty shortly, as well as concluding our prep activities in launching our certification program. So in terms of learning, there are several here, and I've touched on some already, but I would highlight just one around our virtual conference. Just knowing that we could pull something as big and successful, a multi-day event as a virtual conference, which drew more than 1,000 participants, and what it takes to do it, I think definitely was one of the key learnings. It has since improved and modernized our content delivery too. As you see, even this webinar is being done differently. And I think there are learnings that we could say or attest to back into how we were able to do our 2020 annual conference. Secondly, by going virtual, we were also able to tap into geographies that weren't possible for us holding an in-person event, especially on an annual conference, which is mostly in the US. But we did have other virtual events across the globe. We had an India annual conference successfully attended by almost 1,000 people there too, as well as our European conference and our conference in China. Let's move on to next slide and let's look at the state of our industry holistically, a 50,000 feet view, and briefly touch on, again, not repeating what we talked about in our last conversation, but let's look at some high-level trends that we see. And then we will talk about what it means specifically for clinical data management and where we are headed in 2021 and beyond. So let's move on to the state of our industry. So thank you. So as we head into 2021, it's clear that we'll continue to reel from the impact of COVID-19. I just talked about specifically in terms of what we do on a day-to-day basis. There is a lot that we need to kind of continue to manage in terms of risks. But there are other higher level undercurrents at play too that we need to at the very least acknowledge them. So here on this slide, it's a 30,000 feet, 50,000 feet macro view of our global broader biopharma R&D. First, I would say, as they say, the easy fruits have all been picked, right? So trials are becoming much more complex, much more expensive, and that is causing a lot of this productivity concern on the R&D end. Secondly, the prescription cost pressures are continuing to mount, considering U.S. prescription drug spending per Kaiser has risen more than 1,500% in the last 30 years. Now, let's just absorb that number, 1,500% in the last 30 years. In financial terms, that would be a CAGR, or a compound annual growth rate, of approximately 28%. Of course, that's not sustainable from any lens. And hence our broader industry kind of moving towards this kind of outcome-based pricing models, which, by the way, given we are data geeks here, also mean more real-world evidence data to manage, more real-world evidence data to mine, to showcase the cost benefit of our drug compared to its competitors, to our payers. But even in light of these headwinds, these broader headwinds, the drug development is continuing to march on. It's continuing to soar. According to ct.gov, as of end of 2020, there were four times the number of active studies that were logged in ct.gov than there were in 2010. Now, of course, there are more trials, but with this increase in the number of trials, we also have witnessed the complexity in the study designs, and even within our own organizations. Then there is this undercurrent of patient recruitment challenges. Mikhail talked about it at his last address, annual address, which continued to again add both to the cost of the development and the reach of clinical trials to the patients. Current estimates are still along this 3 to 5%, in some cases about 7%. Of people, of patients that participate in clinical trials, of course, adjusting to that range with different disease areas, which of course is forcing this kind of trend more towards patient-centric trials. Let's bring trial to the patient's doorsteps so they don't have to travel 100 miles to get to a site to be able to participate in clinical trial. But I think one of the reflections here from my perspective is, yes, there is quite a bit of rise in the technologies and decentralized clinical trials methods. And all of these methods are also creating this massive amount of data streams, with more and more of our data being collected as e-source, be it eCOA, wearable, sensors. All of this data needs to be managed. And in some cases, it may not be humanly possible to manage this amount of data using old methods. The good news from my perspective is there are technologies that do harness the power of AI, machine learning, we talked about at our last webinar, that can help detect these anomalies in these massive data sets. I'll touch on this a little bit later in my presentation too. Then there is an aspect of data sharing. There are people who want to get access to this data. And there are very good use cases, both from a patient perspective, including synthetic control arms. And there are platforms like Vivli or Transcelerate Data Accelerate initiative, which are enabling more of this data sharing within our industry. Lastly, I would say diversity. Diversity in clinical trials is a real issue. I talked about 3 to 5% of patients participating in our clinical trials. But if you were to start to take a look at the data that is individuals that are participating in our trials, people of color, the numbers are dismal. And our agencies are also putting their focus on this issue, this challenge in diversity in our clinical trials. FDA even had a paper or a guidance that came out in last November, where they talked about more inclusive trial practices, ensuring that the study population is really representing more of the general population that will ultimately use the drug. So quite a bit of these undercurrents are at play. Now, to be fair, not all of these issues impact CDM in that direct sense that CDM can take an action and change the cost of drugs, for example. But as we look at these headwinds, some of these headwinds are giving us caution, but there are some tailwinds here too, which are propelling us forward. From my perspective, I think it is vital that we recognize and evolve with these changing times, and look at the levers of people or process or technology or a combination of all of these to continue to provide value in terms of what clinical data management brings to the table. Okay, now let's move on from this kind of macro view of global biopharma, and let's dive closer to home and talk about the path forward for CDM. So this picture, I'm sure you've seen the elements of the 3 papers that are listed on the slide. And this picture on the right-hand side that people who have at least gone through our papers, recent papers have seen it. But as we look for the path forward for clinical data management, both near and long term, I think we would see that our push and our evolution into clinical data science will continue. With a lot of this availability of data science technology that are now available and are now at our disposal. That is one of those kind of tailwinds I talked about, right? Stuff that is propelling us forward. But the question still lies, right? What does evolution look like? And again, to answer this particular question, what does this evolution look like? Our SCDM Innovation Committee, a think tank with, I think collectively, we jotted down our total experiences. The people participating and putting these papers out had almost 2 centuries worth of collective industry experience. And those guys have been deliberating on this very topic for a few years now. And they have provided their sort of collective gaze, their sort of crystal ball into the future through these 3 reflection papers that you see on the slide, or what we sometime within our innovation committee would call CDM 2.0. But let me try and take a minute and paint this picture here for all of you. Think of this evolution and journey that's not something brand new, okay? First and foremost, this evolution and this journey is being founded on years, decades of solid fundamental data management. The aspect of TA, the disease level, the scientific understanding of the protocol, which is a competency data management has. And with all aspects of data integrity, data quality that's woven into those practices, think of GCDMP. When I consider, what would I call this new function? Of course, clinical data science isn't easy to say that, but to me, it's sort of more of a techno-strategic clinical data world, right? A function that embraces strategically, not one size fits all, but strategically, the use of technologies to collect as much of its data as possible at the source, the data that is objective versus subjective, to apply this risk-based quality management practices to manage this data. And yes, to do this well, there is an aspect of standards, there's an aspect of metadata, master data that all fit in here. Finally, think of this picture as a function that embraces AI and machine learning in its traditional data cleaning practices and its processes, which would allow a human capital to be invested in uncovering trends, and more importantly, estimating the impact of those trends that these AI and machine learnings may be uncovering and may be putting out for you on the overall quality of the data, right? Still sounds abstract. No worries. I'll try and make it as concrete as possible, and I'll give you some more examples. And I will say though, you're not alone in this. When I mentioned this vision, when some of our innovation committee team members, talk to their folks in their network, and I have spoken to members of my own organization, their first reaction typically is, Sanjay, it's all well and good. I get the part about the tech. I get the part about the volume, the veracity, the variety of data that we would collect, and the complex study design. I get all 3 of those, right? But how does this practically change how we work day to day? It's an excellent question, and I say that, and I welcome it, because to me, it shows that the individual asking the question is focused and they really want to understand it deeply. So I want to take an example of data cleaning and the use of machine learning or AI in the process, and in the process done right. Can we move on to the next slide, please? Okay, so before I explain the slide, I want to put some additional context. We know we all don't work in a homogeneous way, right? Organizations come in different shapes, different sizes, and so do their strategic roadmaps, their appetite for moving through this evolution, and at whatever speed. By the way, I know I've been doing a lot of talking, but if you guys don't mind, as I'm speaking to these slides, or sharing some of this perspective from SCDM, if you don't mind commenting in the comment text or the bubble, to kind of share where you see, share your gaze into where we would be evolving. It would help us kind of make this a two-way conversation, more of a dialogue than a monologue. Okay, so coming back. So organizations, different shapes, different sizes, different strategic roadmaps, different appetites. And when I say appetite, this may not just be that some of them may not want to move through this journey. Their priorities and their time horizons could be very different. So I don't believe that this is something that the entire industry across the board will evolve in, say, 2022 and 2023, for example. And when I say across the industry, meaning all companies, all shapes and sizes will be performing, will be acting, will have new roles, will have new ways of working across all of their trials, right? That's sort of not something I'm expecting. And I say that also, as a competitor, yes, we are now looking at these technologies and we want to adopt them. We want to really ensure that the DM continues to provide some value. But it is still a very conservative sort of an industry, right? We have regulations. We can't just be sharing our data willy-nilly. We don't make widgets. As I say to my team, we work in clinical research, which impacts patients. But as a competitor, right? So as a competitor, in terms of thinking about not one size fit all or kind of fit for purpose, as a competitor, we have EDC with us for how long now, right? But whether we like it or not, don't we see some paper studies done here and there, right? So it's not something, okay, we have this sort of evolution in 2022, everybody is going to be all adapting AI and machine learning, and this is how data cleaning will happen. No. But at the same time, I don't want to make it sound like this is a far-fetched idea either. This is a futuristic view of where SCDM thinks, where through its platform, we think the CDM will evolve into. Time horizon, again, is going to depend on case-by-case basis. And I will tell you, even today, there are organizations employing strategies that may look at this picture and say, you know what? Well, we do that, or we do that part of it already today, or we have active plans to pursue it, or to companies who have decided to prioritize other aspects of their operating model. But even those companies and my peers, they also acknowledge they will need to eventually get there, right? So that being a kind of long-winded caveat on this slide, and I think it's worth putting it out there. There is a level of pragmatism that needs to be said about this. So now let me explain this slide, right? So on the left-hand side of this picture think of it as our current state. And hopefully this example will kind of solidify a little bit more concretely what we mean when we say evolution into clinical data science, this techno-strategic clinical data science function. So on the left-hand side of this picture is our current state, where we apply more of a traditional data validation, data review, data cleaning, whatever you want to call it. Although people call it data cleaning, I know some of my friends in their organization want to call it data validation, not data cleaning. I get that. Yes, there is some visualization involved, even on the left-hand side, but it still requires a lot of manual review to identify those trends, those anomalies. Still more focused on the data coming in from EDC though. Now, if you move on to the right-hand side, which depicts how human and machine are going to work together to manage high volume of data, to detect patterns in this data, not just within a patient, okay? but across patients, not within a site, across sites, within and across studies and across sites. So you may have a site that may be performing on multiple of your studies and may have, I don't know, 20, 30 patients. How is that site contributing to the data? How that site is entering their data? What is their operational metrics? What is the quality of the data that particular site is entering? What is behind that site's performance in a certain way? And how does the site compare to other sites within that geographies, right? So when we talk about moving to this the right-hand side, that means that having sets of roles and people within our organization, where you will see some of our roles evolving into what we call it on this slide is a data and a process supervisor role, where you will see a big chunk of people looking at data, but all of that data, that trend that's being given to them is primarily coming through this AI and machine learning pattern detection bit. But those, you will see people supervising those machines. You would still have cases where more of a human would be needed, similar to the traditional ways on the left-hand side to uncover patterns that are perhaps not as clear-cut as it would be for machine to identify. Could very well be that due to the lack of data to train the algorithms correctly or train the models correctly. So current role plus supervisor role plus an infinite sets of bots that would be working 24/7, mining, detecting these patterns, or answering Alexa type questions. That's the world, that's the evolution we are talking about. Now, there are also a bunch of technology prereqs here, right? Including having an intelligent sort of a clinical data platform, clinical data environment, more modernized data environment, a sets of ML algorithm models that are once developed, but are then often supervised by the data sciences experts who would either confirm or deny the patterns the machine may be detecting, which would, again, sort of a continuous learning, right? Which would further fuel sort of the intelligence in those algorithms or in those models for the next time and so on and so forth. So in theory, if you have monthly review of your study data, say across 100 studies, right? And you do that once a month. By going through this sort of regular training of your models, you would be training these algorithms 100 times a month, right? With new data that could be coming in. And one could have a bunch of these ML programs for a particular TA, because the patterns that are detected in a particular disease area may be different. Or some of them could very well work across, these models could work across our studies, across our TAs. I do think moving to completely unsupervised AI for big chunks of our process, I think maybe a too far to go in the medium term, but not to say that certain elements or types of queries that we do review through our data cleaning methods can't be fully operating that way, right? Fully, quote unquote, unsupervised, whereby a machine would apply the NLP, right? Because there's a lot of text mining. If there's a text mining involved in the model, for example, apply a lot of NLP and review, create this trend, understand, hey, this trend is definitely an issue, and then applying some level of NLG to generate query text, send the query out, read the response back from the site, and either takes action, either to close the query or to even pop that element up for human to take a closer look at. Let's try and make it more concrete, right? So, and I'll give you an example of a case study that we ran in my organization in late 2019. As part of our sort of a multi-year roadmap, we initiated a project working with one of our partners companies where we used very specific use cases, which and people say, well, why did you pick those use cases? Those use cases today at Allergan were where most of our manual queries were being generated. And again, those domains aren't kind of foreign to you all. It's typically the AEs, the medical histories, and the ConMeds. And those three data sets, if you will, when people were reviewing it, both for data management's review or for our clinical team to review, and I guess, don't want to get too much into that particular case study, and I can talk about that, and I promise I will talk about it at a greater length at hopefully a future webinar. But suffice to say, the work we undertook here proved exactly the point that you're seeing on this picture. We had ML programs using quite a bit of NLP because AEs, essentially, they're more of, term or the text or the verbatim. You would take a look at that NLP. We used a lot of data clustering methods. We also looked at different models that were available online, different data sets that were available online to try and pattern a particular condition or a particular medication or a particular medical history into a sort of clusters. And what these programs did, they surfaced the errors to say, hey, you know what, I think this particular AE or this particular ConMed is being taken for this condition, and that condition is perhaps not listed as an AE, right? This ConMed is typically taken for these 10 things. I don't think anything related to these 10 things in AE. Now, if you were to think about that, those types of review would typically be something a clinically trained person would do. So those are the kind of stuff that these algorithms start spitting it out. And some were much more data management centric. Hey, the dates overlap, do not make sense. Or, hey, this data is getting entered at this particular point in time that seemed to be, I don't know, night in that particular geography and things like that. So you may want to take a closer look. Is this data really getting entered according to the clock or the time that the person said that this data was being entered for? And when we did that, it highlighted these errors and issues. We had our lead DM look at those issues as they were being highlighted through these models. We said, yes, this is a real issue, and no, this is not a real issue. And we went through this kind of circle for 3 or 4 times. And I would say, this project for me depicted, while there were value that we could say, hey, could we prove this concept? And yes, of course, we did that. But this project for me also depicted the new skill sets we would start to have in our organizations. Think about ML programmers, think about data modelers, sort of a core data scientist skill set, which again, in our current organization, we would typically find quite a number of data analytics programmers for a particular tech. For example, you may have Spotfire programmers, but not necessarily with this kind of background. So something that we would need to kind of think about and have it in the back of mind in the future. The point here is that the harnessing the power of machine learning for these specific cases within our discipline is not just something a far-fetched idea, not something, hey, is this possible? But it's being put to use today. I would also mention companies and I would name them, that's fine. I know you would see a recent conversation that is taking place where a biopharma company that came out with a vaccine for COVID-19 talked about Pfizer, talked about how they were able to use machine learning to advance data review in their recent vaccine trials. So again, not a far-fetched dream. It's here. It's happening now. And the other aspects of looking at this is, okay, redeploying the human capital to work on the aspect that may be something people may find new, right? As we move into this current state to the future state, we will find, hey, these are the aspects. So I talked about risk assessment. upstream data collection, allowing more of digital trial data to be captured. And all of that work would seem like something we do not do today and something we would have to kind of take on. So upstream data collection, data flow design, estimating risks, putting mitigations in place, helping deploying more digital technologies, more DCTs. And as Ian Schaefer mentioned at our last webinar, and I think it's worth repeating, organizations would be best served if they focus on what value they are going to be drawing out and adopting sort of an approach where they start small, but after the concepts are proven, they move fast. None of these pilots, we don't have to kind of live in this pilot graveyard, right, where we continue to pilot and pilot and pilot because the stuff is changing fast. But identifying what are the most critical components, where is the value, adopting these sorts of approaches, trying them small and moving quickly. To me, this is, in a nutshell, what this evolution is starting to look like. Now let's take a look at how do we get there, right, from here to there. So from an SCDM perspective, right, so how does SCDM as an organization plans to enable this evolution? So for 2021, we have laid out our 3 top priorities for this effect. These include thought leadership, certification, GCDMP refresh, and this GCDMP refresh is going to cover our most current topics. And I'll talk about these one by one in a little bit more detail. Let's move on. I don't know how many of you have seen this slide, but this is our society's 3-year strategic roadmap that we embarked on, I guess, in mid-2019 on the heels of, as we were establishing a pivot of SCDM from clinical data management centric to clinical data science, adopting that sort of a vision in our real vision and mission statements. We set out on this 3-year roadmap, 3-year journey, again, underpinning the areas of advocacy, areas of education, and areas of thought leadership. And what we said that these are the aspects that would enable us to become or to be able to position us well to be able to realize our vision. So in 2020, to help bring this clinical data management, clinical data science related sort of content, as I said earlier, there is a formal section on our website that we also launched, but this 3-year strategy roadmap is what we have been working on. In 2020, yes, COVID-19 disrupted some of our plans, but in 2021 and beyond, we want to get back on this. We definitely want to ensure that the aspects, the fundamentals of the foundation that we put in 2020, that we realize those plans in 2021, and whatever we put as foundation in 2021, we realize them in 2022. Let's move on to the next slide. Okay, now let me talk about 2021 priorities for me, for the exec committee, for the board, and how they align to our evolution and our journey. First, under thought leadership and advocacy, we want to formally put a stake in the ground, right? So with a formal position on clinical data science, moving from reflection papers to formal SCDM positions. Our innovation committee chair calls this RPA, not to be confused with robotics process automation, but reflection to position to action. Secondly, we are establishing a biopharma DM leadership council platform through SCDM, which will enable in 2021 key decision makers to collaborate with each other to collectively move the industry on this evolution journey. The founding organization of this council includes the top 10 global biopharma companies, heads of data management and monitoring, and we'll continue to expand this platform this year and next year. Lastly, putting a formal regulatory council in place. You know, SCDM, we take at SCDM, we take pride in, how do we engage with our regulatory bodies and our colleagues in that part of the world. And we have been doing it for a number of years. We have our formal regulatory panel that we do it at every annual conference. This year, right now, as I talk, we are currently very closely engaged with them to actively share ideas on how this AI and the machine learning use cases, that if DM organizations were to put those, how would the regulatory agencies look at those data review, data management practices, right? So to ensure we have a more kind of formal SCDM agencies mechanism, SCDM to these regulatory agency kind of conduit, we will build and we will launch a formal SCDM regulatory council who will take this sort of a vision of this kind of continued dialogue forward and understanding and interacting in a more formal way on all matters of regulatory importance in our day-to-day. So this is what SCDM will hope to enable in 2021. On education and certification, we all know very well at EC and the board, GCDMP brings tremendous value to our professionals. And we have a responsibility to continue to keep it refreshed with changing times. And these times are changing pretty quickly, right? So this year, we have instituted a sort of a rapid refresh plan around our GCDMP. This will allow adding of new and supplemental content, supplemental material on aspects, even the stuff that I touched today. And there are individuals within our board who would be taking on this sort of really huge effort. And I want to thank Arshad Mohabbat to be able to take this on and moving it forward for us. SCDM will also be launching, as I said earlier, an open access peer-reviewed journal that will promote and publish both scholarly work that is very relevant to our clinical data science under the leadership of Chief Editor of the journal, Meredith. All of the prep is done. I think she mentioned it to the board just a week and a half, 2 weeks ago, and we should expect the first issue to come out in the next several weeks. Lastly, on certification, this committee has been working day and night out in terms of really putting the certification program back on track. And yes, after being on a hiatus for a brief time due to some technical reasons, we'll also be relaunching that certification program this year. Our plan is to have the beta exam rolled out, I believe, in for about 200 or so participants sometime in March. But we will quickly put the learnings from this beta exam to have a formal CCDM in production by late summer. But I want to tell you, though, there is more than CCDM that we as an organization are after. And I'll talk about this in a little bit later. This is an exciting piece that I'm sure you will all get excited about it. Lastly, on this slide, these key priorities wouldn't be possible without having an organization that is agile and also financially viable. So this year, we will work on simplifying some aspects of our committees, putting a way for the new talent to help lead and shape SCDM, as well as focusing our marketing effort on bringing additional value to our partners so that we can continue to work in a more sustainable way for years to come and continue to invest in the things that I've talked about earlier. And then all of you continue to get the value through your SCDM membership, or if your organization has a corporate membership, that you continue to draw that value out of SCDM. And there is a specific effort that Mayank will lead around this through one of the committees. Now, let's share a specific examples of how we plan to get our reflection to position to action. So can we move on to the next slide, please? So this is when we say the RPA, this is what that RPA would look like for us, right? So utilizing the content that we have put together from SCDM for years, converting that sort of a content, building on those assets into some bite-sized and focused areas, something in the middle, right? That's our position. This will be, of course, driven primarily from the work from our both our education committee, both our content development work, and our innovation. All of this needs to come together. Our goal is to put SCDM's formal position on clinical data science in 2021 and build this content and ultimately utilize this content and have new chapters in the GCDMP. So again, moving from reflection to have specific positions, specific content that we will put in action in the GCDMP itself. Let's move on to the one, I believe this is one of the other slides that kind of shows that reflection, position, action, and action. Certification program. And this is what I said I will talk to you a little bit later. So speaking to industry leaders and bouncing ideas on the value that SCDM could be bringing, let me share a bit of our vision of a 3-tier certification program or 3-tier certification strategy. We want to have an entry-level CCDA, Certified Clinical Data Analyst certification or Associate certification, to an experienced CCDM certification, and to an advanced CCDS. So 3-tier certification, CCDA, CCDM, CCDS, Certified Clinical Data Associate, Data Manager, the Data Scientist. So to realize this sort of an ultimate vision, first we need to get our CCDM off the ground, right? Push to get this quick GCDMP refresh, build a foundation through our content for both a CCDS program as well as a associate program certification in the next year or two. For CCDS certification, we believe a solid fundamentals and foundation in CCDM is a must-have. And that fits in this evolution and the journey that we have talked about. We will position the certification as such, where we would ask the CCDM to be sort of a prereq for people to get into a CCDS certification. What the entry-level CCDA certification would also do is it would enable organization to get a pipeline of talent that at least has gone through some basic understanding of what a clinical data world is, what practices are there. So having that basic understanding as a CCDA, I think would be a good stepping stone for people to get into our discipline, building on these experiences and getting a CCDM certification and then launching into the CCDS. So I am extremely excited about this three-tier certification strategy that we would want to take on. So this is honestly exciting time. Let's move on. So this is our SCDM community, right? So as I said, apart from having a society management partner in MCI who helps put this beautiful webinars together for us, we are essentially a volunteer-run organization. All the priorities on the previous page wouldn't be possible without the drive and the passion of those volunteers. So here is my call. It is my call for action, call for people who really want to shape our discipline, who really want to join forces, consider volunteering. We have a number of committees where we can utilize your skill set. Of course, the most pressing need right now or the moment is getting the GCDMP refreshed and helping with those chapters. And I'm sure Arshad would be more than welcoming people who could bring in this kind of drive to get GCDMP refresh completed sooner rather than later. You know, we also have more than 100 partners, and we are continuing to expand our circle of friends of SCDM. SCDM as a community, as you see through these numbers, is growing. And I think the board, the EC, I know the current past chairs, and we all kind of take pride in how we are growing this society together. But there is more for us to do, right? Let's move on to the next slide. And let me introduce to you our 2021 Board of Trustees. Here is our members of our EC, our member of the board, This leadership team spans from biopharmas to CROs to technology providers, partners, to academia. What I've said in terms of where at least I would want, with the help of the EC and the board, where would we want this SCDM to go? Our 2020 ambitions are high, and I get it. And for some, given this is a volunteer-run organization, it may sound like a lot to chew. I totally get it. But at the same time, I think this sense of urgency is exactly what's needed at this time to build on the 2020 work that we did, to think differently, to get the journey that we are on and the milestones that we want to achieve in that journey, achieving those milestones, to ensure our members, for the most important piece, our members feel supported as we walk them and walk us with them through this journey together. And to be honest, if you see the pictures here, right, with this leadership on the board, and I know the support we can count on from our volunteers, I know we can do it. There is no doubt. I think we can do it. Let's move on to the next slide, and I will conclude here. In closing, I would only echo what I think our past chairs have said in their annual addresses as to why our profession is a noble one. There is a deeper meaning to the work we do and the impact our work has. Personally, for me, as a middle-class kid growing up, doing my undergrad in New Delhi, mid-90s, I'm going to start to show my age now. I had no idea. I had really no idea whatsoever that I'll end up in biopharma, given my background was squarely in comp-sci, squarely in software development. But after being part of this profession for these many years, honestly, looking back, I don't know. I don't think I would trade this for anything else. I say this to my team pretty regularly, right? We don't make widgets. What we do matters. We help advance science, and collectively, we help bring therapies to millions of people that really have nowhere to turn. So there is no doubt our profession is also evolving. While the core fundamentals of what CDM does are still at play, changes in what we do on a day-to-day basis have been constant. Be data collection, moving from paper to EDC, to collecting data more at the source, e-source, decentralized trials, or be it in data processing. Anybody remember, sometimes the reams of paper that we would print our SAS listings on, and we would hand it over to our clinical teams, and they would review it, and they will have this big ruler that they would put the ruler, and they would do this kind of line by line, beautiful review, really precision. Moving from those manual data listings to targeted checks with EDC coming in, more of the CDMS data verification validation, to visualizing data, right? So visualizing data using analytics to now, moving on to this AI and machine learning journey and anomaly detections that way. Our profession has been evolving. This evolution has been kind of continuing to happen. And even how CDM organizations have been operating over the years, that has also gone through changes too. Having more primarily employee-based CDM functions located in maybe 1 or 2 locations, to adopting flexible resourcing models, working in now multiple different time zones. One of my mentors used to say, this is kind of the 24/7 clock, Sanjay, now we are on, right? So we are going to work across the earth with the clock. To me, I think what this demonstrates is we are a very adaptable bunch. And I think we will adapt to these current trends also. And we will do that, I think, very successfully. But we need to first acknowledge them. We need to first acknowledge that there are these undercurrents, these trends, by developing roadmaps to be ready, We can't just continue to say, yeah, these things are happening, and yeah, we will get there, without having a formal step-by-step roadmap for us to be ready to seize on these opportunities. And lastly, executing on those plans, right? So those kind of 3 steps are essential. And I would say the state of our profession is strong. These external forces and opportunities we talked about over these 2 webinars are creating this massive explosion in the data. To manage this data, we need professionals. We need professionals who are going to ensure, one, we collect the right data for the protocol, right? Like the basic data management piece. We manage risk in that data, that the data is of the highest integrity, highest quality, data that is fit to draw scientific conclusions from. And 3, we do it in the most effective manner, the most efficient manner. We focus on value. We focus on utilizing right tools, right technology, not one size fit all, but fit for purpose. And I believe our 3 reflection papers do a tremendous job, a phenomenal job at laying out what to expect in terms of the overall shift we are going through. From an SCDM perspective, I can assure you that as your professional society, with those leaders that you saw a couple slides ago, SCDM will be there to help you both with tools and knowledge, and by continuing to drive this sort of thought leadership in 2021 and beyond. And I would conclude here, but in my view, I think no state of industry dialogue is complete without putting a focus on the patients in our clinical trials. And while I'd mentioned this earlier in terms of patient recruitment challenges and how those challenges impact the overall drug development cost and the availability of clinical trials to the patients, I know organizations of all shapes and sizes are continuing to find ways to reach those untapped areas, including adoption of more hybrid DCTs. Data management has a significant role to play. We have a significant role to play to partner with our clinical operations colleagues and push for those digital platforms through these DCTs, adapting these digital ways of working. But while we help, fix and move the needle on to this digital realm and evolve, we also cannot forget the participants, the patients who do sign up, the healthy volunteers who do choose to participate. So I would like to thank, thousands of volunteers who chose to participate in these vaccine trials and help bring those vaccines out. And these vaccines are so desperately needed. So I would just end here. Finally, I would leave you with this video because I think to me, it enforces why we all come to work every day. It just underscores it for me. And I'm sure it would do that for you too. And I will meet you on the other side with the Q&A with Mikhail. So I want to thank you all for your attention. I know it's been a lot of talking, a lot of hearing from your perspective, a lot of talking for me, a lot of hearing for you. But I really want to thank you for your attention and all that you do to serve patients. Patients come first. Thank you.
When I was first diagnosed with metastatic breast cancer, it was a pretty poor prognosis. I had a grandchild due in May, and I didn't know whether I'd even be alive to see my grandchild born. And Terry and I have been married at that stage. It was 47 years. And we didn't know whether we'd meet our 50th anniversary. You realise that you may not be here. I actually thought I had a bladder infection. I was feeling very bloated in the tummy, and eventually I had a laparoscopy and they found I had metastatic breast cancer. That morning, the doctor came in. He had all these photos of all my insides, and it had spread to the liver, the peritoneum, the omentum, the adrenals, and the spine, as it turned out. And after the doctor left, Terry was there. I just burst into tears, and I sobbed and I sobbed and I sobbed. That particular surgeon said, you'll probably just go into palliative care, which was pretty devastating. My gynaecologist, Dr. Jarbak, he rang me and he said, there's a better hope because it's actually breast cancer. It's metastatic breast cancer, and there are some treatments. They discovered I had HER2 positive breast cancer, which means that there was the patina trial that I was able to go on. It was hopeful. They had used it for other sorts of cancer, but it hasn't been approved for this, but it was hopeful. And after I started on the trial, I told everyone I've got magic pills because I just started to feel so much better, and I gradually got my strength back, my energy back, my appetite back. I was able to start doing so much more, and now I'm playing golf again, and it's wonderful. And I'm able to get back to being normal and going places and doing what I want to do, and life is normal again. For me, it's given me a future, and I'm hoping that they find it's going to help a lot of other people. The results of these trials can give such hope and a life back to people that maybe didn't have a future. I think having something like breast cancer or any cancer, it does change your perspective on life. It makes you realise that, yeah, you may not live forever, but enjoy what you've got. Enjoy the now. Enjoy each day as it comes. We're going along fine now, and I think we'll get to our 50th. But it's all due to the trial. If I hadn't gone on the trial, I don't know what would have happened. I probably wouldn't be here now. And I certainly would recommend anybody to grab it. If you get a chance to go on a trial, just grab it with both hands and go for it.
Hello everyone, this is Michael Goethe, as Sanjay introduced me already. I would like to be the first one to congratulate you, Sanjay, on, wow, what an amazing state of the industry address here. Looking back at 2020 and definitely providing a clear guidance and way and your vision on how you see us as an industry, us as humans, us as a profession, us as a society for clinical data management moving forward. Our Q&A board truly exploding with comments and great questions here. I want to start with one, and it comes from no less than a former chair of the board, former board person here, saying, Sanjay, I just want to say how excited I am to see the direction of SCDM and how you are leading the organization into the future. Many thanks for your service to SCDM, best wishes. And that's just one comment that we got from many that summarizes how people feel on the nerve you struck. On that note, I think it's the first time I'm seeing somebody volunteering and signing up for SCDM already. So while you were speaking over the last hour plus, we had one person saying, I'm so interested, I'm joining. And she's saying multiple committees. So that's something definitely we wanted to reach out there. In order to allow you to quickly catch your breath after this great presentation, just quickly knocking out some of the more logistical questions. Many people asked if these slides and the content would be available. We are planning to have it available in slide format, hopefully in the next 24 hours. There will be also more reference on our webpage. And believe it or not, it will be on YouTube. So Sanjay is definitely becoming one of the next YouTube sensations out there and going viral with it. I'm certain about that. There was one specific question around the white papers that you mentioned on some of your slides, Sanjay. And they can be found on our scdm.org webpage under the tab What We Do, Publications, and then White Papers. You will find those as well. So I think this is as far in terms of logistical questions. We got a ton of questions, which I'm going to try to group a little bit. And there were at least 4 or 5 questions going towards how smaller companies, small biotech companies, smaller studies can embrace AI and machine learning. And there were some concerns to say, this is so expensive, we can just do it for 1 or 2 studies. How many studies do you need to make AI suitable and feasible? Why is technology so expensive? So there's definitely a huge appetite knowing more about, if you're a small company and at the beginning of it, yes, we want to do it, but how do we get even started if it's so expensive, so out of reach?
Yeah, so there is no doubt about that. You know, anything that you start in the very beginning, I think, is pretty expensive. But I think as more and more partners and biopharma companies utilize it, I think the costs are eventually going to come down in terms of the technologies, cost of using those technologies. But some of, you know, from the 2019 experience that I had running this park, it really did not. It required a environment for you to have these models, these machine learning models built in. And I think more companies, as they use it, hopefully there are going to be models that are going to be available for us to kind of draw upon, as there are for models for NLP or some algorithms that are available. So as I think more and more of our industry adopts these sorts of technologies, I think the more they're going to be more available. There is a very valid point in this question about how do smaller biotechs adopt to these technologies. My response there is, you know, it is we are starting right now, right? And you don't have to jump in and be on the cutting edge. I think you being on the cutting edge from a biotech perspective, just on bringing the treatments first, I think is great. I would say I think some companies may want to wait and watch and see some of this thing kind of play out. There are bigger players or bigger players in the sense like bigger biopharma companies that are definitely investing quite heavily in this, and I think there are going to be learnings from there. So not like there's no panacea. There's not okay. You could is there a simpler, is there a cheaper solution that you could adapt? And hey, we only do 10 studies, or you know, how is that sufficient data to be able to even do it there? And this is where I would say, you know, keep your thinking around the value. And if it doesn't make sense for a smaller biotech, it doesn't mean that you just have to go and jump into this tech world just because people are talking about it, right? It needs to ultimately bring value to your organization. You need to see why I want to adopt this, and if the value is there, I think the business case is there. I'm sure your organization would find a way to fund it. But if it doesn't, you know, I think waiting and watching, I think, is not a bad idea for some of those partners. Mikhail, I don't know if there is anything you would want to add, given some of these smaller biotechs may not have their internal clinical data sort of platforms and engine, and they also rely on, you know, partners like CROs who may kind of also help, you know, maybe move this technology adoption a little bit more too.
Thank you, Sanjay. Quick addition to, I think, your very insightful answer that you had. Maybe addressing first the cost part. If you just look in terms of cost, in terms of having to potentially invest into new technology, you will see an uptick in cost. What we have seen, for example, is that if you look over the overall budget for clinical study, if those technologies in the right setting, in the right indication and right population can move towards more a decentralized clinical trial, for example, where you can accelerate your enrollment curves, just shortening a study by, let's say, 6 months, there's a considerable cost saving on that end. If you can reduce the actual source data verification amount, which is one of the biggest cost drivers when it comes to a clinical study, with a relatively small investment into the technology, I think suddenly the conversation starts, can small companies still afford not jumping on this industry trend? I think so. Cost has to be seen for the overall study. And quickly to your question, absolutely correct. If as a company you don't want to go into that investment, reach out to companies, service providers, CEOs out there that are doing it. There's not one size fit all. Trying to address one question that I'm seeing here as well in terms of, is this something that we can deploy in every study? No, it's not. It's something where, again, region, therapeutic area, what kind of clinical study are we talking, where we want to go more traditional or more what our technology allows us now to do. So I think this is what I would add to your question, Sanjay.
Yeah, I think, Nikhil, the other thing that you said, and I think just maybe worth underscoring, even for the decentralized clinical trials, right? It's not for every trial. You can put a Botox in, you can self-administer Botox, again, a product, right? Or aspects of a therapy that are perhaps not fit for purpose for these virtual visits. But there could be other visits within a particular trial where it would be completely best fit. So I think of DCT as not 100% DCT, but a combination, a hybrid sort of a model.
Absolutely, Sanjay. Sanjay, because we are short on time, there are a couple of questions that I definitely would like to get in and combine in another cool question here, which focuses more on the human element. Yes, I think you addressed it in your presentation, but it was also very focused on the technology part. So one question is, what do you feel the skill set need for CDM staff or CDS staff going forward should entail? And there was a question that seems to be coming up every year. So I would like to see your reaction to it. And we saw the question when we moved from paper to EDC, basically suggesting that with all this AI, the human effort or the CDM role might not be as needed as often. So if you expect numbers in the clinical data management community actually going down, so it speaks to the human element. And do we have to fear for our jobs, Sanjay?
So second question first. We do not have to fear. I think as you saw, right, the number of clinical trials that are running from 2010 to 2020, there is 4 times the number of studies that are active at the moment. That, along with this data piece that we talk about, it will require people. Yes, there will be an aspect of AI machine learning that would help with some data processing elements, but those pieces are also going to get added by elements that we perhaps in clinical data management do not do. We do not currently in data management help put decentralized clinical trials in practice, right? We do not manage our data through 7 or 8 different variables. So there would be other aspects of our discipline that would require more of the people perspective. But there are definitely, there is no doubt there are aspects of our jobs that would be handled by some of these kind of machine learning methods. But I think, as you saw in that picture, even if you were to say, if 10 people work today in data review, tomorrow you would say there would be 9 people, right? Because there are some of the work would be done by machines, but there is going to be people who will need to train these machines, who will need to continue to say, yes, the signal is right, the signal is wrong, and then aspects of process supervisor, right? So talk about monitoring your data stream, a risk assessment, upstream risk assessment, identifying and building your study in terms of these are the data streams versus building your study thinking this is the EDC database I need to put together, right? So there is a little bit of difference there in terms of skill set. Now talking about what new skill set we would need, right? So keep your data management skills and hone in on those, right? Ensuring the more closer you are to the protocol and thinking about the TA knowledge, thinking about your expertise within a particular types of disease area, absolutely critical. These machines do not understand biology, right? So there is an aspect of what the protocol is. These machines need to get trained on those aspects. And it would be you guys, it would be data management team who would be helping train these machines to be able to identify and pick those signals. So the AI machine learning, the conversation, I think was more around data processing side, but there are this huge aspects of implementing DCTs, doing these risk assessments, that are going to be absolutely critical. So it will supplement the work that may be going away. The new work that we would do on the data management side, I think would supplement and even far more exceed the number of people that you would see in data management today.
Thank you, Sanjay. And I'm getting the signal that we are, I think, at the end of time, so I can't put you for more questions out there here. But I think as we have the name of the people who asked those questions, partly there, I think we can commit to try to get an answer to them as well, and we can sit together here. So with that, Sanjay, I'm passing it back to you to close it out in the next 20 seconds or so.
Well, thank you, Mikhail. Well, as Mikhail said, we will respond to each and every one of those questions, and people who are volunteering, my sincere thanks to you. As I've said it before, we rely on volunteers. And we are also, by the way, extending our annual conference session chairs. So if you want to volunteer, and I think volunteer in a more concrete way, become session chairs, drive a type of conversation that you feel deeply about. So definitely do that. And stay connected with SCDM, become members. If you're not members, ask your organization to partner with us. And together, SCDM will be there every step of the way. We will be launching new content. Stay tuned. And with that, thank you so much for all that you do and the attention that you showed with these questions. I'm just so happy to see this kind of engagement on this call. I appreciate it. Thank you so much, everybody.